You're muted, you damn millennial.
Why does Zoom automatically mute you on entry?
I think I set this up quick. I usually just put them unless it's like a big meeting with like 40 people. It's a setting, so you can blame me.
Okay, I will.
Okay, well, welcome to It's Personal, Not Political, the podcast where we explore the deeply personal stories behind reproductive freedom in Wyoming. I'm Marcie Kindred, and zooming in with me today is my good friend and co-host, Kevin Ogle.
Hey, everybody. Today, we have a really important conversation lined up. We're sitting down with Riata and Ian Walker, a Wyoming couple who faced a heart-wrenching decision during a wanted pregnancy.
That's right. Riata and Ian made a difficult choice to terminate their pregnancy for medical reasons. And today, we're here to share their experience and talk about what it was like as a couple, as parents, and as now advocates.
Let's jump in and meet them.
Riata and Ian, welcome to the podcast. Before we dive into your story, why don't you both just introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your background, where you're from, how you met, and what was life like before this journey began?
I guess I'll start. My name is Ian Walker. I've lived in Wyoming majority of my life. Born and raised in Casper with my dad and two older brothers. Raised in a pretty conservative household. We were raised Catholic, did the whole communion, confirmation, did all that growing up, and lived a pretty typical Wyoming life here. Nothing too exciting.
And then I'm Riata. I am a fourth generation Wyoming native, born and raised on my family ranch in Sheridan County. And part of that ranch was homesteaded by my great grandmother, who came from Ireland at 17 and was one of the few women that were allowed to homestead without a male signature during that very small window of time. So a lot of strong, independent women in my line that I feel like I'm carrying on that legacy. So I was raised also Catholic, very conservative, obviously ranching family, and really maintained that for most of my life up until the last couple of years.
How did you two meet?
We actually met online.
Yeah.
For the ages. Yes, that's how everybody meets these days.
Right. For a while, we used to say we met via mutual friends, not wanting to tell the true story. Mm-hmm. I had moved to Casper. Ian was back in Casper teaching. I didn't think I would ever live in Casper, but I came here to work for Senator Barrasso. And about a year in, I'm like, I need to meet somebody and like just get out and do some things. And so we met primarily on the premise of like hiking and having fun. And then it turned into love.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. We can edit out that it was a dating app. Well, your secret is safe with us.
That's fantastic.
It was on Tinder, and we usually don't tell anybody. We used to
That's
not
amazing.
Tinder, but
hey, it worked.
Good old Tinder.
Good old Tinder. So before this experience, like, did abortion, did this whole conversation feel so far removed from, like, had you ever thought about it? What were your personal beliefs about abortion growing up?
For me, I always kind of felt like I never really had much of an opinion other than like, it shouldn't be an issue. Like, it should be your choice. It should be based on what's best for you, your family, and anything like that. But it never like was like a staunch, like, I'm pro-choice, and that's how I stand. I just always kind of felt that's just what should be necessary.
And then for me, I was definitely in the camp of believing what I'd always been told. The church believes in exceptions for rape, incest, and danger to the mother. Obviously, our situation was never on my radar. I So I would have always said I was pro-life with exceptions. I always felt like that was really important. I always said if I had gotten pregnant as a teenager, I would have kept it because I couldn't ever imagine giving away a baby. I think that would be too hard to carry it and then give it away. So for me, that's what I always said. But I remember in my days working for Senator Barrasso, and I remember saying to some people, until we do something about the broken adoption and foster system, we can't ban abortion. So I obviously already kind of was working maybe that in that direction, but still would have said that I was pro-life. And then obviously our circumstances changed everything for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, yes, let's get into that. Can you share with our listeners about your very first pregnancy and what led to the decision of termination?
Yeah. So we had just gotten married and did the whole not trying, not preventing thing, got pregnant right away. And we're really excited to have a baby and, just never dreamed that anything bad would happen. So just started getting prepared and really excited. It was the fall of 2019. So also we had no idea what was coming in terms of the world of COVID, but that was coming right down the wire. And so we were going to our appointments. We were offered to do genetic testing, and we asked our doctor, we're like, is this really necessary? We're not, really that old. I was 29, going to be 30, and he was in his early 30s. So, we're just like, no history in our family. Do we really need to do this? She's like, you'll probably be fine. The other interesting thing is that unless you have any prior history, that's an extra cost. So a lot of people, especially with the first pregnancy where there's no history, are going to opt out. And so they're going to miss any of those genetic screening things early on. So we got all the way to 20 weeks before we had any concept that there was an issue. Everything seemed perfect. I felt great. Pregnancy was easy, no problem. We go to our 20-week scan. We're really excited to see our daughter. And we got home and I said to Ian, did the text seem kind of quiet to you? And he was like, no, I think it was all fine. We were just happy and, parents of the year, so excited. And then I think it was the next day and in the afternoon, my doctor called and said, so you're now high risk. You're going to deliver in Denver. We're sending you to Denver. The head maternal fetal medicine doctor is going to give you a call and schedule in the next day or two. And so she's got heart defects, a 25% chance of chromosomal issues, probably Down syndrome. And so there you go. So it felt very much like our doctor was washing her hands of us, but we just had no idea of like how serious it really was even then. But it was a shock. So then we start that process. Denver gets us down there as soon as possible. They wanted us there that week and we pushed it off because he's a teacher. So he had to get time off so that we could go down to Denver. And so we got in Monday morning, 8 a.m. And when the head doctor called me to schedule and he said, so in these circumstances, we always, want to make sure that you're aware of your options. If termination's not an option for you, you can tell us now and we won't bring it up again. And so I just remember thinking to myself, well, I don't even know what all's wrong at this point. We don't even know what the heart diagnosis is. Of course, we had all kinds of people telling us, oh, it'll all be fine. My friend's daughter had this happen. They went down. Everything was perfect. And so it's just a precaution. But I just couldn't rule out an option without having all the details. And so that's what I told him. I said, well, I hate to take an option off the table if we don't even know what's going on yet. And he said, okay, understood. Then once we got to Denver, it became very clear that she really wasn't going to have much of a life if she survived at all. And survive is just surviving birth and making it to term and that whole ballgame.
It sounds like you knew in that initial appointment, like, did the text seem quiet? Like you just had that, it's like an intuition, like something's off, something doesn't feel right.
Right.
And then when the doctor asked, like, is this an option we should take off the table? Even at that point, would you say you considered yourself pro-life still? Like you hadn't had to think about it and that was just your values up until this point?
Yeah. So, I mean, I never dreamed that I would ever have to terminate a pregnancy. And that really was never an option for me. I mean, even with the Down syndrome and stuff, all I knew were the happy, smiling Down syndrome kids.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so while I saw some difficulty in that, I, I still thought, well, we're going to be great parents. We can handle that. It's going to be tough. There's going to be challenges. We're going to have some heart surgeries. We'll be fine. And yet, yeah, there was just that voice in the back of my head that was like, just don't rule something out right now. Just don't do it.
I also remember during that phone call, because I was on speakerphone, and he said that Rihanna and I both kind of made eye contact and just kind of like look at each other. I think we had an unspoken, like, let's keep that option on the table. Like, we didn't necessarily say it, but we both kind of looked at each other and kind of knew, like, we should, just in case or whatever we find out, like, let's not take that off the table.
Well, the way he said it too, where he's just like, tell me now, we won't mention it again. It was a very definitive. Like, if I say that now, I'm taking that option off the table, and I don't even have all of the answers yet as to what's wrong with her. All I know is heart defects, possibly chromosomal issues, and that we're high risk. That's all I know at this point, because we haven't met with any of the specialists. This was to schedule and meet with the specialists and get the heart echo done so that we could see what her heart really was. And, we're waiting on blood test results to find out on chromosomal. I mean, there was so much up in the air at that point in time.
That is such an important piece of this story. I spend a lot of time watching anti-abortion, like messaging and arguments that they're using and what's coming down the pike with this job. And they are doing like a campaign right now about interviewing folks whose mothers considered abortion. And the common narrative is, the doctors kept telling me to terminate. Doctors kept telling me to terminate. And it's a through line in all of these stories. And that was one of the very first questions your doctor asked was, tell me right now, and we'll never speak of it again. That just, it is not in line with all of these stories that I keep listening to, that the doctors are there to give you all of the information, and they will respect whatever decision you come to as a couple.
Well, and perspective is so important on that too, because is that just their perspective because they come from that pro-life stance and because they ended up with a success? The other part that I would point out in there is that they still got the right to choose what they wanted. And so and we'll get into this when we start talking about legislation, but what I always tell people is you have to realize that if you allow the government to take an option away from us, you're allowing it in the opposite too. So what if government control changes, the precedent is there, and now government can force you to end a pregnancy that you wanted to carry to term? That choice is now taken away. And so we need to think about that as well. But for those that their mother ultimately made the choice to carry to term, and I think that they should have that right to choose to carry to term if they want, and that it was a success and they were okay. And that mother's intuition that we just talked about, that I obviously kind of knew that something was wrong, also plays into it. And so we have to be allowed to decide what is right for us and our child and our family.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. My husband and I went to dinner last night, and I don't know how this came up, but the force for like 35 years in China, they could only have one baby, right? There were forced abortions. Like, that's exactly what you just pointed out. Like,
Yeah.
It is taking away a choice on all fronts, which we think that is monstrous. And
Yes.
holy cow, how was that a thing? Yeah, it's the same thing. It's a choice is a choice is a choice.
Yes.
And go ahead, Kevin. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask. So, from the time you had that phone call with your provider, how long was it before you saw the specialist?
So we had our 20-week scan on Tuesday. My doctor called Wednesday afternoon, end of the day, basically. I talked to that doctor on Thursday. He wanted us there on Friday.
Wow.
And we were there at 8 a.m. Monday morning. They moved us very, very fast.
What was that like, knowing that they wanted to see you so quickly, right? Like,
I think that
and the feelings you were going through.
Right. So we were in a whirlwind, and I think just very much deer in the headlights. Like we didn't have enough time to even really think through all the what ifs of what if we get this answer. It was just like, okay, we're going to find out. We'll deal with this when we find out.
It was a very quick experience, and just like Riata said, it was hard to even comprehend a lot of the things. It was hard to just even understand how we were feeling about everything, and a lot of the just unknowns. Just you could feel. I don't say we felt pressured, but we could just tell that there's a sense of urgency that they need us. So obviously, it's something's wrong. Like they see something that they need to get a better picture of. They need to do what they need to do as fast as they can to really kind of let us know what's happening. So we could kind of tell, like, this can't be good if they're pushing, if they're like getting us in as fast as they can, if they're moving things around to see us. And so we just can kind of tell that it was something was wrong.
We were grasping for hope because we were not willing to accept that we weren't coming home without a baby. We still thought we were coming home with a baby. We just thought it was going to be challenging. And so for all those stories that were coming in through, like, oh, it'll all be fine, it was a little hard to accept that it was just a mistake, because it felt very serious and very sure that something was wrong. But we definitely went to Denver thinking that we were going to be talking surgeries and not talking termination.
Like care, how we deal with the situation once the baby's here.
So then after we got to Denver, and here's the really funny how the world and the universe likes to just throw it all at you at once. We were on our way to our appointments that morning. His brother lives in Denver, so we stayed with him. It was actually a convenient drive. We stopped at Starbucks to get some coffee and bacon Gouda sandwiches, which is our thing. And I get my sandwich and there's no bacon on it. And I have the picture of my sandwich. And I'm like, what the hell? No bacon on my bacon Gouda sandwich. And then the rest was like the worst day ever. So we go through our day.
We found out that's a bad omen. If you ever get a sandwich without bacon, then watch out.
Yeah. Noted.
No bacon, no good.
No bacon, no good. The rest of your day's going downhill from there.
So, but then, we have our heart echo. We met with the cardiologist, and then we're meeting with genetics counselors, and we've been with them for quite a while. And of course, all of our families, or my family specifically, maybe we hadn't really told your family much. We told my family some of it. And I just texted my mom and I said, it's worse than we ever thought.
Wow.
And
did you see the cardiologist and the genetic specialist all in that one trip, or was this multiple trips?
No, they were absolutely amazing. So they got us in 8 a.m. We had the tech from the heart echo, and that tech, they took us into a room. The cardiologist came in, we met with him. Then they shuffled us. Instead of going back out through the office and the waiting room, they took us back through hallways to go to the genetics counselors. Because at that point, so the cardiologist was kind of like, did the doctor talk to you about your options, meaning termination? We said yes. He said, okay, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about what it looks like if I were to perform my job. If you choose to go forward with pregnancy, that's all I'm going to talk about. And he did. And so he laid out the different heart conditions that she had. He talked about how challenging that was in terms of the way the different heart conditions played together, which isn't normal. He told us, guaranteed, that there was chromosomal Down syndrome issue as well, because he said he sees maybe 1 or 2 babies a year with that particular combination of heart defects, and they have all had Down syndrome. So then he talked about how that further complicates the heart issues. He just laid it all out there. He was so good at bringing it down to layman's terms. And just when you're hit with that much information, when you're not expecting that, you're really hoping that they're just going to say, actually, it's not that bad. Here you go. We're going to have a couple surgeries and you all are going to be great.
Yeah. Wow.
We're not. Yeah. I mean, there was no talk about her ever leaving the hospital. It was like, if we can get her to term, if we can get her to survive birth, if we can get her big enough to have surgery, then this surgery, then that surgery, then, it was that. And I've talked about that in other things, so I'm not going to go into all the detail on that.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah. And so then we went to the genetics counselors and then we sat there with them. I mean, they were going to make sure we met with everyone that we needed to meet with that day because we'd come such a distance.
Yeah.
Wow.
I also say this was the gold standard of care because, like Marcie, what you were talking about earlier, and how the narrative from the pro-life side is that doctors push this on patients, and that's not how we felt at all. I mean,
not at one moment.
No, I never felt they were pressuring us to lean in any direction, because everybody we talked to, it was, if you choose to move forward with the pregnancy, here's what's going to happen. It was never, you shouldn't move forward with the pregnancy because of this. It was always, if this is what you want to do, here's our plan. And they would always, let us know if there was that option. But just as the more people we talked to and the more things we found out, it's just like Riata said, it was a lot of information at once, but none of it was good. A lot of it was just heartbreaking to hear about what she would suffer through if she did make it and not ever leave the hospital. And so then we started to weigh in on what would our lives look like if Riata was down in Denver with the baby and I was at home trying to work, trying to take care of our house and our dogs. And, just all those things we started to have to think about and, decide like what's best for all of us.
How is this even going to work? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a very Wyoming specific, a rural specific access to care. It's how long of a drive is that from?
Just over 4 hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
depending on traffic.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you hadn't let Ian's family know. At what point did you bring them into this?
We gave him like a little heads up about, we found out that there might be some issues and we have to go down to Denver for further testing. But I think we still didn't really know the gravity of the situation, so we didn't want to stress anybody else out about it too much, because we were hoping that we were going to come back with, oh, it was a mistake, or oh, it's actually not as bad as we anticipated. So we didn't want to get people worked up. So we kind of told them that what we were up to, but we didn't tell them, kind of our real feelings of like how scared we were, how bad this could potentially be. My brother that we stayed with, I don't think even realized like what the situation was that we were going for. We just told him that we were need to go to the specialist and all that. So it wasn't like we were trying to keep anybody out of it. We just didn't want to stress anybody else out over what could have potentially, as people were telling us, could be just fine. But
then once we made that decision, then we moved really fast, which I think is really nice, because when you make such a serious decision like that, such life-changing deal, you don't want to just sit and let that simmer. I mean, it's torture. We stopped at a jewelry store on the way back from Denver to get my rings cleaned, and we were in January of 2020 at this point. So it's winter. So I had my big puffy pregnancy coat on because I was obviously very much showing at that point. I'm 5.5 months pregnant, 21 weeks, 22 at that point, 22 weeks pregnant. So over halfway through, we were planning baby shower. I mean, that's how into it we were. I had a whole bunch of baby stuff already. And I would not take my coat off in that jewelry store while they were cleaning my ring, because I didn't want anyone to ask me about me being pregnant.
Or our sunglasses, because we were crying so much.
Yeah, our eyes were all like red and puffy. And we killed several boxes of Kleenex in those doctors' offices. Several. And so when we start talking about waiting periods and putting people through that torture, once you've made a decision, you just need to be able to go. It's not an easy decision to make. You have to weigh an awful lot of things. No one will ever fully understand everything that you put into making a decision, but you just need to be able to go. So they were phenomenal, the genetics counselors, as we processed everything and laid it all out. And they're like, so, I mean, it kind of sounds like you've made a decision. Do you feel like you have enough information to make that decision? We said yes. And they're like, okay, well, if you want, because you have such a distance, we can start you on the process today. You can go home and be back in 2 days, and because we chose labor and delivery. There's another little piece
Of how, yeah.
Right. That we got a choice of how, because we were after 20 weeks. And so I was offered surgical, which is a D&E, or labor and delivery. Ian basically said, you do whatever you feel is best for you. And I wanted labor and delivery. But most of the time, that's not an option for people, and it's more expensive. But as I was saying to Ian earlier, we were talking about it. I've had 3 babies now. I have had them all the exact same way. 2 of them we got to bring home, and 1 of them was a termination. But I had 3 labor inductions, and I delivered the babies all the exact same way. So if you start talking about what is an abortion procedure and we have to ban the abortion procedure, you're talking about a procedure that results, in live births too.
Yeah.
And the same for a D&C. I mean, you might have retained tissue after giving birth to a live baby, and they have to go in and do a D&C to get the rest of the tissue out. So this is where I get really frustrated about, like, how do you actually legislate this? You can't legislate this and ban stuff because you're going to have unintended consequences we've already seen in other states.
Yeah.
That affect people who are good, wholesome people, quote unquote, trying to, be parents, to have a family and do all of the right things. It doesn't make them bad people.
So you made this decision at like that day, the same day, the first day you went to Denver. Was there a moment? Did you guys have a discussion, or was it a look that you guys were like, oh, this is where we're going?
Well, I was in the genetics counselor's office after we did the heart echo and got all that information. I think we both, without saying it, we're both starting to kind of think we're not getting this baby home. And should we continue on with this? And then after meeting with the genetics counselors, and they were really good, and like they kind of would give us some moments to talk and kind of discuss on our own and kind of leave the room for a little bit. And I think it was during one of those conversations that we kind of just decided that we got to make this decision, because he'd say it like this, but reality would be kind of like a ticking time. Like, is this baby gonna make it to term? What's this baby gonna look like when it comes out? If it does come out, like what's gonna happen afterwards? So just all these like things or we could just say, you know what, let's just be done. Let's just make our decision, end it, and start the grieving process and the healing process and move forward.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of crude, but rip the Band-Aid off. I mean, how long do you have to sit there and grieve in limbo land?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of where you are. And even just those 3 days in between making that decision and getting down there were just a blur. Like, I mean, there's no way that we could have done anything, like gone back to work or anything like that. He went and did his like lesson plans and stuff.
I went to school on Friday after we found all this out. And
oh well, yeah, but
was it Thursday or Friday?
Yeah,
whatever day
Thursday
it was.
and Friday, because we hadn't been to Denver.
So I tried to go to school on Thursday, and just play it off like everything's fine. And I was telling my teaching partner, and I just broke down and said, things are bad. And so I left, and I don't think I went back on Friday.
Oh, maybe not. Maybe you did.
Yeah, I think it was the rest of the week off after that.
Yeah. And at that point, we didn't even we hadn't been to Denver yet. So we didn't even know like how bad it really was. Yeah. But it's, you can't look at these things in the hypothetical. We all want to do that. Like, what would I do if I were in that situation? But every situation's different. Every person's situation is different. And as much as we want to try to prepare, you never really know how you're going to feel until you're faced with it, until everything is laid out on the table. You're talking it through. You're thinking about your future, your now, who else is going to be impacted by it. I mean, we thought, what if we had other kids, which we do now. We have 2 other ones. And then once you make the decision, you just have to be able to move forward. But the limbo land is the worst. And
that's where waiting periods complicate it. Like,
yeah,
the waiting periods just discount that entire story you just told. The week leading up to going to Denver, you're already starting to think about this. You're already considering the what ifs. And then when all the information's laid out and you make that decision, you've already had a waiting period. You've already done all that work.
Yeah.
And that's just,
exactly. And so, yeah, we're really grateful that we didn't have to waste any more time, because that's all you can think about when you're suddenly faced with, oh my gosh, we're losing a child that we wanted, that we had a whole life dreamed for. We were so excited for. We're losing that child. And that's where TFMR, terminations for medical reasons, is baby loss. And in our community, we tout that all the time. It is still baby loss. You still grieve a wanted child. And whether or not you were, where it was really planned, you really were trying for months and months, or whether it was like us where we were not trying, not preventing, or maybe it was even still an accident, but you accepted it and you were going to have it and you were going to raise it. You loved that baby. From the moment you accepted that pregnancy, it was a baby to you. And so it is baby loss. So anyway, yeah. So we got to turn around and do that. But there were also a lot of things we had to do. We had to contact a funeral home because we had to figure out what we were going to do with her remains. So being after 20 weeks, we still have a birth and a death certificate. And we had to deal with those remains. And so we had a lot of things that we had to prepare. We had to deal with our dogs. And then going all the way down to Denver, of course. So my mom had points and she got us a hotel room. She drove us down the night before. We went in first thing in the morning and had her at 22 weeks and 3 days gestation.
Do you think that was some of the urgency? Was your options significantly decrease? You were within days. You were within, you were bumping up against that viability standard.
Yeah, that 24 weeks. So yeah, once you get after 24 weeks, then you kind of have to get approval from the hospital board to have a termination at that point. So once that 24 weeks. So we were a little bit in crunch time. And I think that's why they were kind of letting us. I mean, they would have waited for us if we wanted to. But that's what genetics counselors are trained to do too, like any counselor. But then these are also people who have medical training. They're nurses or doctors, and then they become a genetics counselor. Or anyway, and so they're able to translate that medical information that we've just inhaled from the cardiologist and all the specialists. They understand that, and then they can help us process that through and help us come to it, whatever decision that we needed to come to. And they sensed that in us. They understood the laws and the timeline on it. And
they did inform us too. Because like you said, they said they'd be willing to wait for us, but they did say, but once you hit this timeline or this time frame, then some options may disappear or might be more difficult. So they weren't. I never felt like they were rushing us, but they were just saying, here's the facts of life. Like, you need to make it by this point. Otherwise, things change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were off by 1 week only because of New Year's, because our 20-week scan happened at 21 weeks because of New Year's and the holidays. So that also, it's amazing how just life circumstances that, not even your fault, but just scheduling can put you into those crunch time zones and, to no fault of your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Ian, we've talked a little bit about it, but when you look back at this experience, like how did you process everything as Riata's partner? Riata said, and I've heard her say in other interviews and podcasts, this was a decision you both made, but you also were very like, whatever you need to do, like however we do the termination, that's all up to you.
It was difficult. I don't know if Riata ever mentioned it, but when we first met and were dating and I think even engaged, I was pretty set on like, I don't want kids. I think I was kind of thinking I'm, just, it's not part of who I am, my lifestyle. I just never really saw it happening. So I told that many times. So then I don't know if she softened me or whatever happened, but then she was like, okay, I guess I could maybe have a family and try that. So I never really thought about pregnancy, the process. I was just nothing I ever thought about. I was thought things happen, but for the most part, pregnancies work. There aren't that many issues with it. And so finding this out was pretty wild, just to kind of process all the information, but then also feeling as helpless as I did because I wasn't the one pregnant. I wasn't the one, with this baby. So I kind of felt like I needed to support her needs and what her wants were. I could voice my opinion. I could voice what I thought, but at the end of the day, she's the one carrying the baby. So I got to kind of default to her choices. And so that's why whenever it came down to like that option, there's like, how would you want to perform this? I said that I want you to make that decision, because whatever you want to do, I will support it. But I feel like in that situation, you need to make that call.
How did you guys find, how did you support each other? Did you each have like separate support groups, like your girlfriends, your family, or was it mostly just like you two supporting each other through this?
Go ahead.
I think in some ways we kind of shelled up a little bit and kind of just leaned on each other a lot of the time. And we both kind of made a pact to just not, block each other out. Like, we're there for each other. We support each other through this. We talk to each other about what we're feeling and what's happening. Yeah.
We were aware, maybe not of like the actual statistics, but we were aware that a lot of marriages end after the loss of a child. And obviously we didn't want that to happen. So yeah, coming out of the hospital, we made that pact of, we can't shell up on each other. Like, we can shell up from the world. We can't shell up on each other, and we have to. So that's just kind of a agreement we made on, if we're both grieving, we both lost a kid here, but like, if I need to get something out and I need to talk to somebody, I need you to be there for me, and vice versa. Because if we can't like have each other as each other's safe person, then we're going to turn away from each other. And we kind of knew that. So that was our pact that we made. And at times it was really hard, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so we were January 2020, about mid-January here. So we were about a month and a half away from the whole world shutting down. So then we were locked in our house together, and we really had no other option.
Thank goodness you had laid the ground rules early and like learned this together.
And as bad as it sounds, sometimes we say, thank goodness for COVID. Like, because one, I was miserable being like, once we did like had her, once I took some time off of work, and then when I went back, I was just kind of floating. I was just kind of on autopilot. So I was actually pretty thankful that we're done. We went home. I didn't have to do any teaching for at least a month. I think they just kind of shut it all down until we could figure out what the next steps were. So we were able just to be at home together. Being in Casper, there's a lot of things to do outside, so we could just go do stuff just with each other and our dogs, and just kind of have that time together, but not have to worry about being around people and not to be seen. And I think a lot of people also respected our boundaries too, about let us have our time.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you two have an incredibly strong partnership then and now. I guess, you guys had that conversation about not shelling up on each other, which I think is great. What other advice would you give partners who are making similar decisions, like in that moment, but also like how to handle the situation after a decision is made?
Oh, that's a big, big question. So sorry, little girl. Go ahead.
Communication, I think, is key. Making sure you have that line of communication amongst each other, that no matter what it is, like, nothing should be held back. It should just be, here's how I'm really feeling today. If it's feeling okay, or F the world today, I don't want to talk to anybody or see anybody. Like, I think just being able to communicate your true feelings to each other is helpful. Space is also kind of a nice thing. I mean, at our house, she kind of had the upstairs, I had the downstairs, to kind of just be a recluse if needed. Play hours of video games at a time. She'd watch shows, and I'd check in on her, and she was doing fine, and it seemed like she still wanted just her space, and I would give her space. And I think that helped a lot too, because I think we needed our own time to process what happened, and really figure out I guess figure out like our next steps or how to move forward from this. So.
Yeah, people grieve differently, and so you have to respect that. You have to respect that people are going to grieve in their own way, while also making sure that you're dealing with your own emotions, that you're there to support your partner as they're, needing support in their emotions. It's a lot. I mean, just when you're both grieving. So you have to respect, yes, I'm grieving. Yes, he's grieving. Focus on dealing with me while also supporting him. Because if you block off that, say you just focus on yourself and you forget to support your partner, then something's going to happen there, or vice versa. You don't focus on yourself and you only focus on your partner, and you don't process the emotions that you're dealing with inside, then you're going to finally blow up or break or something. So creating a balance of time together, time alone, learning yourself and how you grieve, and learning your partner and how they grieve, not taking anything too personally. They might snap because they're in a bad place. Like, don't hold that against them. Like, recognize that they're really broken right now too. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard, but I think you got to give yourself grace and you have to give them grace and just try to get through it. How's that for some advice?
Advice for a possible situation.
Yeah. Yeah. You two are incredible in the way you support each other.
Yeah. Before we move into advocacy, I have one question that just came to me. Like, how did your close network of friends, family, when the news started spreading, when you started telling people, how were people's reactions? Was that something that helped, that was hurtful, a mix of both? Like, was that something you also had to process?
I think on my end, my friends were very supportive, understanding. I don't think I had any of them, at least to my knowledge, like, have any shame towards us or like think like, we did the wrong thing of them. Like, my friends are pretty supportive. My family, we're not the best communicators anyway, but from what I gathered, I mean, my dad was there for the birth, and he was there. So, I mean, he got to see it. And I remember talking to my oldest brother, and I said, "You do realize like what happened, right?" Like, and he said, "Yeah." And he was like, "I'm sorry you guys had to deal with that." But then the conversations would stop. Like, we just didn't speak of it. It was, they lost their baby. They didn't want to talk about the why. And I don't know if it's to help us or just they didn't want to talk about the real reason behind it. But I never really felt like they were, upset or like, felt ashamed of us. I just think like they would rather just not talk about why it happened.
Not for everyone, but for some people, I think that there's a certain level of uncomfort with the reality. And so it's easier to just not talk about it. Like, they don't judge us for it because they got our situation. But at the same time, they, philosophically, politically, whatever, religiously, don't agree. And so because of that, it's easier to just go, okay, I'm not going to think about it like that. And I'm just not going to talk about it. And then I don't have to deal with that internally in myself and come to a conclusion.
A little bit of cognitive dissonance, right? Like, they love you, they support you. Of course, like, this was the decision you came to, but just putting that on a shelf somewhere and like, I will be here for my friends and family, Riata and Ian. We're not going to say the word abortion. We're not going to talk about what this is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a challenging thing. And I was a little more pushy with my family and even some friends. Like, not at first. At first, we just posted a picture of us holding her in the hospital bed and just said, we have lost our daughter. We appreciate some, peace and, during this time. Because I didn't want people reaching out about the pregnancy and things. And so I'm like, got to do something. Because we'd done the announcement at 12 weeks with our dogs, baby Walker coming in May, and all the things that now make me cringe a little bit. but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I was going to add, though, you can plug this in when we met, because we talked about this earlier and then I forgot to say it. So when we met, I was working for Senator Barrasso and was very much pretty conservative. And maybe somewhat more towards the middle of the conservative end, definitely not radical, but definitely there. And then he was moderate, pushing the left side. So we came together, brought each other more towards the middle, and that had already kind of happened. And then this, so.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think that this leads us right into the next segment of legislation and how, dealing with the family member's reaction. We didn't say the A word. At what point did you become this? You're such a strong advocate for reproductive freedom now, Riata. Given what you both went through, what point was it the abortion bans? It was in the news. At what point did you feel compelled to get involved, share your story, explain that announcement picture of you in the hospital and say, hey, this is what happened?
Yeah, so it was a healing process for me is where it started. So we lost her. I was desperate to get pregnant again because, I was ready for a baby at that point. Actually, kind of interesting where Ian was saying earlier that he didn't want to have kids prior. When we got pregnant with Riana, which is our daughter's name, I was kind of to the point of, I don't know, I'm kind of happy with our life with our dogs. And like, if we don't have kids, I'm okay with that. But then once we lost her, then I was desperate to be pregnant again. And we got pregnant pretty quickly, about 4 months later with our son. And then, where I thought I would be happy and excited, I was just scared. And I realized that I really just wanted to be pregnant with her again. Never doubting our decision. I totally knew that was the right decision, but I just was grieving my daughter and I missed her and I wanted her back. And another pregnancy was a different baby and it wasn't her. And that's a lot to swallow and a lot to process. And so in that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I need to heal. I need to make sure that I can be the best mom I can be to this baby if it makes it earthside. And so I kind of forced a lot of healing on myself. And so I was involved with some online communities for TFMR and kind of got to a point where I was helping some of the women who were like just facing TFMR, even though I was less than a year out. And I realized that some of those mentors to me who had been years out and had helped me through it were so strong and were such great advocates and educators on the topic that I thought, you know what, with my political background, I know how to testify. Now we have abortion bans going in. A lot of this community can't do this. I need to start using my skills and my knowledge and just start speaking out. So that's where I started. Was those abortion bans were going through the legislature in 21, I think, actually, because I just had my son. He was a few months old, he was born January of 21. So and I'm like, I am going to testify and I'm going to tell our story and I'm going to help them understand that abortion is not what they've been led to believe abortion is. It's broader than that. It's wider than that. It affects normal people that aren't, they're hypothetical, and it would have affected us. And so that was where I started. I testified online in 21. And then from there, I've been asked to speak at pro-choice rallies. I've done TFMR podcasts. I've talked to a lot of different news entities. We did a New York Times article. We've done an AP article. CBS News came out and did a story on us. I don't know, a lot of things. So it started as a healing process for me to force myself to heal. And then it has turned into, I'm strong enough to handle this and to speak out. And so I've got to do it for my sisters-in-laws.
Yeah. Wow. What are some of the real life consequences of these bans for families like yours who are facing an unimaginable decision around a wanted pregnancy? I mean, what do you want lawmakers and people in Wyoming to understand about how this legislation impacts real people?
That there's no way to draw a line in the sand on what's acceptable and what's not. There's just no way to legislate that. And again, like what procedure is acceptable and what's not. They're totally thinking of this late-term abortion, chopping up a baby into pieces and sucking it out, brutal, that's all that abortion is. And that it's always a young, immature girl that was out. We all know what their hypothetical story is, but the reality is it's people like us. And you'll see that out there. Everyone's like, you love someone who's had an abortion because it's just such a complex issue and it's not black and white. It's very gray. And even us, where you would probably look at our story and go, yeah, it was pretty certain that that baby was going to die at some point. There are people out there who still think that we made the wrong decision, even though they don't get to have an opinion. And so, yeah, you can't say, well, this is okay and this is not, because when you start diving into the actual situation, it gets real blurry and messy.
Right.
Where I go is I kind of just try to envision, like, if those laws or bans were in effect when we found this out, let's say it was just nationwide, how some of these people want it, and we don't have a choice. And it is, we have this diagnosis, we have all these issues we have to deal with, but there's nothing we can do about it but wait. I just think, what kind of hell would we have been in to wait it out? Because, like I said, there was all this, she might make it to term, she might not. If she might live at birth, she might live for, a few weeks or months after she's born. And I'm just thinking, what kind of life is that? And so just us being able to have the choice, I look back and I'm very thankful for that, because, that would have really messed us up emotionally, financially, physically. I mean, there's just been a lot of external factors that would have affected us if we didn't actually have a choice. It's hard to imagine that some people are living that life right now where they live. We talked about it earlier, like, it'd have been nice that if we didn't have to drive to Denver to deal with this, it would have been nicer to be able to deal with it at home, not have to get a hotel and drive those hours. I mean, one of the saddest parts about I drive down to Denver to deal with this was the baby started moving in Riata, and she was just out there, and just, I can feel it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, can you imagine what she's going through? I'm heartbroken enough, like, this is happening. I can imagine, like, having the baby inside of me and, like, having that connection with it too. So,
yeah. And then what? So we had a limbo of less than a week, basically. A week, I guess, about a week and a day, actually, from our ultrasound. Sorry.
No, yeah, same.
Yeah. And so if you extend limbo out to a month, 2 months, 4 months, you expect that person to go back to work because their employer's not going to give them that much time. And then, like Ian said earlier, they're a ticking time bomb, because it was like, if she makes it to term, we're kind of surprised that you've carried up till now and not had any issues. So then what? We're in rural Wyoming. I go up to my family ranch to help work cows one day, and I start to miscarry, and I'm 40 miles from the nearest hospital, which is still a tiny little hospital that's, doesn't even deliver babies really anymore. So, I mean, people aren't prepared to deal with that. I mean, you're going to the grocery store and people are asking you, oh, what are you having, boy or girl? Well, actually, it's a baby that's going to die. So I don't talk about that. You have to, like, find a way to, like, focus on your life all while waiting. Like, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen today? Is it going to happen tomorrow? Like, it just puts a lot of stress, anxiety, and pain on people. It's literal torture. You're literally putting people into a torture chamber at that point. And then we didn't have any other kids at that point in time, right? So it was a lot easier for us to go to Denver and just get a dog sitter. My brother watched our dogs. Than if we had a toddler at home that, we're then having to explain this to, and we're going to be gone for a couple days. And, then we come home and we're grieving, and then we have to try to help the sibling grieve. And there are families that have that to deal with. And so allowing people all of the options. So going back, why would you take an option off the table until you have all the answers? Why take the option off the table at all if the situation's not at all what you want? Like, the one option you want is a living baby that you love and you get to bring home and it's healthy, and, that's what we want. That wasn't on the table. So in that situation, when the one option you want isn't on the table, then what other options so that you can, pick the least amount of misery? And so being able to give birth in your local hospital and have the option for labor and delivery if you want it, and have compassionate care from medical professionals who, are aware of this and can speak out about this and provide the best care to their patients without feeling like they're going to be attacked if somebody finds out that that's the kind of care they provide. There's a whole nother element that we can get into, but yeah.
Something that is really powerful to me when you and I, Riata, have spoken, because we have similar journeys of like personal beliefs and personal growth on the issue. And I feel a connection with you when we talk about like how this experience changed, not just like this happens to families like us, this happens to couples of wanted babies, but now you are full bore, like no matter the reason, no matter the choice, everybody deserves access to this option. Even the ones that I hate that it's been painted like people who deserve to have an abortion, like you and the young girl who made who had a passionate night and like
Good for
that,
her.
yeah, good for her. Like mine was instantaneous. Like mine was like once it clicked and like a choice is a choice is a choice. Was it more of a journey for you, or was it like immediate? Like no
It was a
matter the
short
reason.
journey.
Yeah.
It was a short journey. Because suddenly I was in the club, and then, everyone has their different stories and their different diagnoses. And then there's, at first I think I felt like we were very black and white. And then I got in there and realized that we were more on the dark gray realm. And then there were people that, maybe terminated just for a Down syndrome, but they terminated earlier. So then I had to say to myself, okay, so they didn't get far enough to see that there were all these issues with the heart and with other things. And they just had done their research and realized that Down syndrome came with all these possible complications. And they just knew in their situation, they weren't prepared to deal with that. And so, where they would definitely call a termination for Down syndrome a gray diagnosis. But that's why, is because you don't know what else is going to be added on to that. And I'll tell people that I had a gal at a work conference over on the East Coast one time a couple years ago, and she came up and she'd gone to one of those abortion shaming camps, gotten talked into that. And it's a weird story on how like she found me, because had nothing to do with abortion, but I think that there was something, she read something in me and she needed help. And so I looked at her, and she terminated obviously early, I don't know, 11 weeks, something like that. And I said, you don't know what could have happened. I said, you could have miscarried. You easily could have been in a situation like mine where suddenly there were serious medical issues and you would have had to terminate anyway, and your outcome would have been the same. I said, what's important to remember is that you made the best decision you could at that moment with the information you had. And there's no reason to look back now, because, all these, as much as you want to say, well, it could have been a happy, healthy baby. It could have been, but it also could have been a miscarriage. It also could have been a termination just later, because you would have found out other things. And then that would have caused other trauma. So the important part is that you had the right to make that choice, and no one should ever shame you for making that choice, because that's what we're faced with every day. There's actually an entrepreneur guy I listened to one time, and he said that to somebody who's like, you chose not to take this job. He's like, how do you know that on the first day of work on that day that you would have gotten in a massive car wreck and gotten killed? Don't look back, look forward.
Yeah.
Made the best decision with the information you had at the time.
Yeah.
Amen. I think that is like when we talk about exceptions, right, for the life of the mother, pregnancy is dangerous. Like just being pregnant, your life is in danger, especially in America and our maternal death rates. Like it is that exception should just apply. Sure, let's put the exception in. And that just covers every pregnancy every time, because there is a chance of complications, of death. Yeah. Okay.
That's part of my ignorance with pregnancy prior to ever being pregnant or me wanting kids. Is like I said, I always thought it was easy until this. And then the more, Riata talks to me about it and shares stories with me, and then I, educate myself on it, I realize this is not an easy process. And there's so many things that can go wrong. And there's so many people who have had issues, but because of the current state that we're in, people don't want to talk about it. People, feel ashamed to admit, they had an issue or they had to make a decision. And, it's one of those things that I'm proud of Riata for speaking out, because I think it's helping other people also realize it's okay to, talk about these things. It's okay to be, honest about what's happening in their lives too. Because I feel like so many people hide this. And, it was interesting how many people opened up to us after we started sharing our story and, hearing more from Riata. Oh, we had this happen to us, or, it just really opened up the doors to a lot of people, or opened up our eyes to a lot of people that were kind of in the same boat or same situation that we've been in.
Yeah. And whether it's like recent within the last few years or even 40 years ago, I've had people come to me, and then, my daughter's friend, my friend's wife, you can do the whole how many points of separation thing. But yeah, it's wild how many people have come forward. And so I think also on the getting to a place where you're willing to accept it, kind of like where I was, where I had my belief system. It sounded good. I was bought into the whole pro-life with exceptions because I got those. But then I just accepted that. That's, I don't like the idea of killing perfectly healthy babies in the womb, right? So that's where I stand. That's where I am. And then you move on because it doesn't affect you. And so I guess my goal is kind of what your mission is, Marcie, in terms of this grassroots movement, is to just talk to people. And as I forced my family to do that, and I forced them to accept our situation, then at the post office, they're having a conversation with the postmaster. Oh, well, yeah. So my friend's daughter had that happen too. And, and then I was involved in foster care, and I saw these horror stories of foster care, and it's challenged my viewpoints on all of this. And I mean, it just have the conversations, and then you'll start hearing the stories, and then you'll start questioning your beliefs even more. And ultimately, because it's not political, it is personal, just as religion is personal, just as healthcare is personal, just as any of our belief systems. I mean, it's all so personal. And if we want to share it, we will. Sometimes we don't. But the government doesn't get to step in and tell us what to do in these situations, because it's just not right. And there's no way that the government is ever going to have a one-size-fits-all piece of legislation that caters to these unique situations where right and wrong varies in every single situation for every single person.
Agreed.
Agreed. Kevin, you're going to have to edit this down to 45 minutes, but I do.
Yeah, sorry. I told you I'm a rambler. I will just ramble all day long.
No,
I don't think there's anything that should be edited out of this. I think it's incredible.
I think it's just, I've listened to 2-hour-long podcasts. This may just be a long, we can have an extended cut.
The director's cut. The Marcie's director cut.
Subscribers, you can access the extended cut. But I do want to get into segment 5, because something that doesn't get talked about enough is the role of men in these conversations. It's actually a huge part of what led to bringing Kevin on as not just a producer, as I originally asked him, hey, will you produce this podcast? But as a co-host, because it is a missing voice a lot of times, and we need to hear more of it. And so we're so grateful that Ian's on with us today.
Yeah.
Ian, why do you think men are often left out of the dialogue when it comes to decisions about pregnancies, especially when it affects families and partnerships like yours?
I think a lot of it is, since we're not the ones carrying the baby, I kind of feel like men kind of default to, well, it's their baby, or it's, their responsibility almost to advocate for themselves or take care of the pregnancy themselves. I don't know. I kind of find that odd now, looking back on how the men, mainly men, are the ones making the decisions about abortion in this country. But yet when it comes to the family decision, it seems like men are either, aren't voicing their opinion enough, or just aren't thought about enough. I don't know, but ever since then, I've kind of realized like the role that men should play, and that is be an advocate for their wife or their partner, because that decision affects both of you. If we stand on the sideline and let people make these decisions for us, then we lose that choice as well. I mean, I never want to say like I was thankful that this happened, but I was thankful that we had a choice. And I feel like if we stay silent in this, other people are going to start making those choices for us. And so the role we can play is be an advocate for your partner, be an advocate for other people that are in these situations or could potentially see these situations. But yeah, I just feel like, again, with my ignorance to pregnancies and all this, I just always thought, oh, that's woman's job. That's her deal. Until that baby's out, what can I do? For 9 months, I'm on the sideline just waiting. So that's kind of her realm. But now looking back, it's important to be involved. Just be that supporting role, but also, have a voice too.
Agreed. It can be intimidating to join this conversation, right? And like you're doing this for your family, right? I am in a same-sex relationship, but I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I'm also thinking about this for her, right? Like I'm a man of many opinions, but if she was ever put in a position like your story, it wouldn't be my place to ever project my opinions on her, but I want her to have the opportunity to make any decision she needs to in that moment, right? I couldn't even imagine her being put in a position where there are bans that would potentially impact her ability to make a decision about a wanted pregnancy if she was in a similar situation, right? So I couldn't be happier that you're here, Ian, helping talk about this. I guess, how do you think we can encourage more men to not just support their partners or their families or whatever their motive would be for having a voice in the conversation, but how do we get them to advocate for themselves as well in this situation?
I think having these conversations should help. I think including the men in decision making and just letting them know about their role. Like I said, and I kind of agree with what you said. It's like, as a guy, as a man, sometimes it's almost like, how do I talk about pregnancy when I can't ever be pregnant? How can I voice my opinion on that when all I can say is, well, you've never been pregnant, so how do you know?
Right.
So I do agree that it is intimidating to have those conversations, but I also feel like it's very important for men to be more educated on the facts.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I didn't know much about pregnancy. I thought it was easy. I thought, it only happens every once in a while. I didn't realize the statistics at the time. So I think educating men at a young age too. Like, I remember going through school when they started talking about our changing bodies. They don't inform us about the woman's part. They just say, this is what we're going to go through. And so they don't really educate us on what the women are going through, what their bodies are going to do when they're pregnant, what are the statistics of a healthy baby or a miscarriage or other things like that. So I think as guys, we're just kind of blissfully ignorant to the fact of what happens. I think we just kind of think, oh, they're pregnant. That's on them. In 9 months, I might have a baby and I'll deal with it then. So education to men is important. Just getting that conversation out there to them and helping them understand what their role can be in case they do find themselves in a situation that we are in.
I think that's really important. I think the education, obviously, when you have a bunch of old white men in the legislature making decisions, you're going to have to. So listen, when I testify, and part of my story that I tell them to make them a little bit uncomfortable is the fact that after I had my daughter and I came home, my milk came in and then I had to dry up and I had to deal with that on top of grief of losing a baby, being postpartum, bleeding, wearing pads. I mean, the whole thing. I literally gave birth to a baby. And so I purposely put that in to make them a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit spiteful, but think of it. I mean, we have had a tradition of, men don't want to talk about periods and things that involve women's health that are a very much regular thing. You have a baby, the hormones go, your milk comes in. It happens. You got to deal with it.
Hurts. When you said that immediately, did you see? I was like, oh,
yeah.
And you're grieving and you're sore and like,
yeah.
There's nowhere for the milk to go. And oh, baby. Yeah, like that is just heart wrenching and would make these old dudes making these laws very uncomfortable because they don't like to talk about that.
Right.
But if you can't even talk about these issues, you sure as hell have no right legislating and making decisions about them.
Yep. Bingo. So yeah, I think that, I mean, from my perspective as his partner, I think that it was a family decision. And I always say that we made that decision and there's power in that. You feel empowered, even if it's not the decision you wanted to be able to make. You got to make the decision, the best decision for our family, for our circumstances. And it was definitely a we decision.
Mm-hmm.
But then on top of that, then there's the element of, okay, so we've made this decision for our family. Now you as the woman, being the bearer of this pregnancy, you have a little bit more say in the matter in terms of how you want to proceed. Right. And so that's where he stepped in and he's like, no, it's your body now. Now that we've decided that ending the pregnancy is the right thing for us and for our family. Now I support you on how you want to do that. So I think that's a good distinction to make too. And then, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. There we go on my rambling again.
They're not you have not rambled once.
No.
During this whole
Not at all.
conversation. I'm like
Not at all.
on the edge of my seat the whole time. I think, and this is something that frustrates me, and I hate that it's true, but one of the reasons why it's important for men to have a voice in this issue is that other men will listen to men more than women. Like, that's just a fact. I wish it wasn't
It's true.
true. However, Ian, you're more likely to be heard by folks that look like you, right?
Mhm.
And so this conversation, you being willing to come on this podcast and supporting your wife, and like, it's all part of it. It doesn't work without the male perspective saying, like, even just an amen, like, yeah, listen to this lady. She knows what's up. Yeah.
So I went, or Riata spoke at the Pro-Choice Wyoming and Lander.
Oh, the Reproductive Freedom
Okay,
Summit in Lander. Yeah.
So I went there to support her, but also, help wrangle the kids and whatnot. And one thing that, as I was kind of looking around the audience, I was happy to see that there were other guys there, but at the same time, I was also like, there's only a few. Like, I probably count them on both hands, if that. And they seem there to be supportive of either their wives or the message. But there definitely was one of those things where we need both sides in on this. We can't just have all women trying to battle for this when it affects everybody. And so I did appreciate seeing the other males there, but I also felt like there should be more.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an intimidation factor of like, well, that doesn't affect me, so why should I go? Will the women, boo me and shame me for showing up to something like this? I think I just think it's hard for the men to want to get involved with those things because it is intimidating, but at the same time, I think it'd be necessary to, if there's a male speaker there or something, I don't know if that would draw more people there too, or like more guys to go watch something like that or not. But I just felt like I was just looking around the room thinking, man, there's just not good representation on the male side here.
Well, it is
Yeah,
also important for reproductive freedom, right? Because just like we were saying earlier about two sides to the same coin. So we give the government power to make our reproductive health care decisions for us. Then say the women take over the legislature, and now we're going to make vasectomies mandatory for all men over 40 or something. I don't know. But seriously, I mean, we're setting that precedent. And so, yeah, it does affect men.
It does.
100%. And I think it's a both and. It's all of the reasons you just mentioned, Ian, why there aren't more men. I think the good men feel like I don't want to step on toes. Go for it, ladies. And so when in reality, like, there is things we do need your support and your voice, and it can help us get the message, amplify it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the apathy and like the disconnect, like, this doesn't affect me. Why would I go to a reproductive freedom rally? Yeah, it's a
Right.
But then they're quick to vote on it as pro-life because that's how I'll get reelected, because people really care about this issue. And so if I make a good showing that I'm pro-life, I'll get reelected. I don't really care about the issue too much, but
Yeah. Riata, I mean, you are clearly an advocate for reproductive freedom. What has this journey been like for you since, I mean, it sounds like 2021, right? As part of the healing process, right? What has that been like for you, and how has sharing your story helped others? And how do you hope it impacts the future of reproductive rights in Wyoming?
well, so I mean, I think that it has helped quite a few people just in that, like, say, for example, my brother, I know he has a handful of different people in his life through his chain of people that have had this happen to them. And he's offered me up as a support system for them. Like, because so often when this happens, you feel like you're on an island, that you're the only one that this is happening to.
Right.
And you don't know where to turn. You're afraid of the shame that's going to come if you're honest about your situation, especially in Wyoming, very rural, conservative. And so even though you made the right choice, you think it's not going to be received well. So you choose to allow people to believe that it was just a miscarriage,
Yeah.
or something to that effect. So one, just being able to be there for people and let them know it's okay to be truthful about your story. You will survive. Like, there are probably going to be some people who judge you. Feel free to block them. You can do that. And you can heal better by just being honest and owning your truth. And then what was the second part of that question?
I mean, just your hope for how you impact the future of the reproductive rights in Wyoming.
Right. So I just want to bring this away from the propaganda narrative that has been all these years. Yeah. I want to bring it back to a human level and to get people to a place where we're not talking the hypothetical propaganda poster child anymore, that we're starting to think about our neighbors and our friends and our family members, and to really think about the big picture of, if we are going to make laws, what else could this affect?
Right.
It's not just what I'm being told. I have to think critically about what else this impacts. And I can't just accept what I'm being fed from my trusted sources. Like, I just need to take a step back, think about my friends and family, and, oh, wait, yeah, I know that one person, then they had that one situation. Would they fall under this? Oh, they might have. Oh, that would have been horrible for them. I'm not sure I can support this in that sense. This is about protecting freedom in general. Oh, this isn't about me picking a political party side. This is just about me recognizing that I love freedom and I love freedom for everybody. And so I need to support that. It's not about picking a political side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Ian, have you always felt comfortable being so public with the story? Like,
At first I was okay with it being a little bit quieter. I don't know if it was more the shame or just like, it's just a sad story. And, it's hard for me to, tell people the story. It's hard for me to think about what happened. So just kind of like keeping it just like, we lost a child. Let's not talk about it. I think was an easy way for me to handle it. But then as I saw Riata get more involved and, help other people, and see that sharing our story does help others. And, I think about like the friends that she's made through this, like the people she's helped through this, I think it's been a positive thing. And so I do feel more comfortable now. I'm actually, really proud when she's asked to go speak somewhere, or be on a podcast, or have, news cameras show up at her house to talk about this. I'm just like, if this is going to help people, if this is going to help spread the message or make people more aware of what's happening, then let's do it. It took me a while to kind of come to terms with this, but I do think it's a good thing.
Yeah, Riata shared it was part of her grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
This was definitely not how you would have processed the grief.
I'm a pretty, private person as it is, so just having to bring up these parts of my life, or the traumas, like it's kind of an uncomfortable spot for me. But as a family, it feels right. I remember when Riata was joining these Facebook groups and just sending all these messages to people, and just at one point I was like, are you sure this is good for you? Like, you're literally reading about heart-wrenching stories. Like, she would just tell me, oh, I just read this story about this kid or this family or this lady just did this, and she'd just be bawling. And so at one point I'm like, is this healthy for you? Like, should we? I was even like, I think at one point I said, how about we both take Facebook off our phones for a little bit? Like, let's just take a break and get away from all this. And she said, no, like, this is helping me. It's helping me get through this. And so I took a step back, said, okay, if this is your process, go for it. And then over time, I realized it has helped. It is a good way for her to process this. And like I said, watching her, to help other people, I think helped her. And so it's been an interesting process for me to watch and be a part of, to see, how this is and where this has gone.
Y'all are such an incredible MVP, like couple goals, right? Like that commitment you made to each other at the very beginning of like, we will not turn away from each other, and understanding that everybody grieves differently. And when Riata told you, when you're like, are you sure this is healthy? Are you sure this is good for you? And she says with like sobbing cheeks, like, yes, this is what I need.
Yeah.
And you trusted her and you said, okay, all right. And just that trust and that long-term, like, we're going to get through this together, inevitably bringing you along for this journey of advocacy. Y'all are the best. The best.
Right. It's all Riana. She did this to us. That's what we say, is she was the final like glue for our relationship. Yeah.
You took that statistic of like child loss ending in divorce often, and like it in a way like strengthened your relationship. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us today. It's incredibly powerful. Conversations like these really showcase the complexities of these deeply personal decisions. And we're grateful for your vulnerability and honesty. Sharing this story is not only going to help people feel less alone in making these kinds of decisions, but highlights the reality that pregnancy is too complex to legislate. As we say, pregnancy is personal, not political.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you both. It was awesome to meet both of you today. I had not met you before this, and it was an honor to get to hear your story and talk about why it's so critical that people have the freedom to make these personal choices without interference.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for putting up with our little hiccup girl over here. I'm sure that's come through.
She was great.
She's sound asleep in my lap now, but
none of my children could I have ever attempted a 2-hour podcast with. Like,
no.
There's no way. Charlie wouldn't have made it through, Kevin? No.
Nope, she would not have.
No, not even at that age. Yeah. I would have been like slapping the camera and
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us.
For having us.
I hope I didn't do too much talking when I know I was set to let him take the lead.
No, not at all.
Both of you. So great.
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. If you were moved by what you heard today, please consider sharing this episode with others. Together, we can shift the narrative around reproductive freedom here in Wyoming. Until next time, this is Marcie.
And this is Kevin.
Signing off from It's Personal, Not Political.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of It's Personal, Not Political with Marcie and Kevin, a production of Wyoming United for Freedom, Inc. This episode was written and directed by Marcie Kindred, edited and produced by me, Kevin Ogle. Our theme song, Wyoming, was created by Jeff F. at Mr. Boo Daddy on socials. Podcast art created by Chris Arneson and incorporates our logo designed by Addie Jenkins. Until next time, stay united and remember, pregnancy is personal, not political. Let's keep sharing our stories and change the narrative.